This very special double episode of the Vincast is brought to you in part by Different Drop. Different Drop is an online wine retailer. They're based in Sydney, but they can send wine all over Australia. And they only sell Australian wines, but they're finding wines that are a little bit harder to get, ones you're not going to find in the big chain retail stores, because they're made by a lot of the time artisan producers and some really innovative and sustainable producers as well. So previous guests of the podcast, and hopefully some future guests, their wines get sold by Different Drop, and they're lovingly curated by the guys. They're put together in a really fun way. Lots and lots of information there as well. So if you go to differentdrop.com/intrepid wino, you're going to find a little secret section that's been set up for subscribers to this podcast, and you'll be able to secure some wines that you might not otherwise be able to get. Wines like Unico Zello, Amato Vino, Jamshed. And you also, if you put in Intrepid Wino at purchase, the guys at Different Drop are going to give you a little bit of a bonus as well. So make sure you go to Different Drop, buy some wines from the guests of the podcast to show support for them and to show support for this podcast. And thank you very much. On part B of episode 64 of the Vincast, I chat with Damon Koerner, whose family have been growing grapes in the Clare Valley for many, many years, and only recently he and his younger brother have launched the Koerner Wines brand, making some really, really exciting and different wines. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Garsbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I've got something a little bit different for you this week. It's sort of like a sort of bonus or a double episode, because the two guys that I chatted with are both quite, in their 20s, so they're still just getting started as far as winemaking, but they also grew up on vineyards and sort of learnt a little bit from their parents and went away and studied at Adelaide University, and they're actually really good mates, even though they come from quite different regions here in Australia. So my first guest on, which is part A, I guess, is Josh Cooper, and his parents established Cobaw Ridge in the Macedon Ranges, which is just outside of Melbourne. It's one of the coolest sites, coolest regions in Victoria, and Cobaw Ridge is certified biodynamic, making some really exceptional wines. My guest on the other part, on part B, will be Damon Koerner, whose parents, his dad especially, has grown grapes in the Clare Valley in South Australia for many, many years and planted his own vineyard. And now he and now Damon and his younger brother, they're making their own wines under the Koerner, which is Koerner label, and some really, really exciting stuff. So both of them are kind of, in their side projects, are sort of making some skin contact type wines, oxidation, that really, really interesting stuff. So I had a chat with them, tasted some of their wines, and so if you're listening to this part, please make sure to listen to the other part as well, because some really interesting stuff. Damon, thank you for being on the Vincast today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Damon, what was can you remember what the first interaction with wine was that sort of made you think that you'd like to sort of follow a career path in wine?
I guess growing up in the Clare Valley, my parents are grape growers, and they have been their whole lives. So,
were their families also involved?
No, Mum's parents were farmers. Yeah, Auburn, so Southern Clare. Dad's parents were beekeepers, so
beekeepers,
strong agricultural background. But Dad had a bit of a crack at working for his old man as a beekeeper when he finished school, but that didn't work out for whatever reason, and got a job with Penfolds up in Clare.
He didn't get on with his co-workers.
Yeah, I mean, so from as long as I can remember, we've lived on our vineyard and grown up around it. We've chopped and changed things a lot, just planting new things, different vineyards. both in Clare, the Adelaide Hills. Dad's done a lot of work in the Barossa as well. So
When did your parents get involved with wine?
pretty well straight after they finished school. Dad started leasing a vineyard, which he sort of worked on the weekends. And from memory, I think it was predominantly Riesling. He was selling it to Brian Crozer at Petaluma.
Okay.
So,
Hanlon Hill Riesling?
The Hanlon Hill vineyard's been planted since, but originally...
Right.
Yeah.
It was just Petaluma Riesling.
Exactly, Clare Valley Riesling. So
Yeah, okay.
he was working for Penfolds during the week. Ended up managing their Clare vineyard for 14 odd years or something. So.
But like as a viticulturalist or as a winemaker?
No, more viticulture, just vineyard manager.
Yep.
He doesn't have any formal qualifications, but
just learn by doing.
Exactly. So.
And your mum?
She's pretty well a mother.
Okay. So but it was just sort of like family business. So when did he kind of decide that he'd like to start his own vineyard, his own business?
I think since he sort of started working in viticulture, he always sort of had his own vineyard and built up a few in Clare around Watervale. The one that we now have, Gully View Vineyard, which is where we source most of the fruit from for the Koerner wine label, was his first one. And he slowly just sort of built it up, bought the neighbouring properties, and sort of now a nice 50-hectare vineyard, a few different varieties that are well suited to Clare. Also had a play around in the Adelaide Hills. We had a property down there in Gumaraka that...
yes.
I've
been there.
Sold that a couple of years ago, but grew a bit of Sauv Blanc and Pinot and Chardonnay. And
was the idea to grow and sell the fruit, or predominantly make a bit of their own wine?
No, never. And to be honest, I've never actually asked him why he never made any wine himself, but it has been on my mind.
Like he just prefers working on the land as opposed to in the cellar.
He's quite a particular person and likes getting it right in the vineyard, and that sort of I guess that's what he sees his role as, and always on-sold the fruit to different wineries, predominantly Treasury, having worked for Penfolds for so long, has some good connections there, but also Orlando and local producers in Clare, Taylor's, Pikes, and then some other smaller ones. But
so did you, when you were growing up, did you spend much time with him out in the vineyards and kind of get a feel for that kind of work?
Yep, so that was where I spent a lot of time. And I guess I grew up in the early 90s through to the early 2000s when in South Australia there was that huge planting of vines. So I had a lot to do, and he was a big part of that, I guess, and had a lot to do with him setting up vineyards. Like I said just before, Clare, Barossa, Adelaide Hills. So we would quite often help him on the weekends after work.
Putting in posts and laying wires and that sort of stuff?
Marking out rows, hitting in pegs and,
At what point did you learn how to drive a tractor, for example?
I reckon I would have been about 13 before that let me hop in a tractor, but would have been on a quad at about 5.
Yeah?
I think I've seen some old photos of me as a baby sitting in a tractor while he was driving it. But,
they couldn't fit the baby seat in the tractor? What was it like growing up in the Clare Valley? You know, was it a different kind of environment? Did you have friends who also were from sort of wine families?
Both my parents come from big families. So a lot of cousins that lived up there that we spent a lot of time with. But none of them were really involved in the wine. One of my uncles is a winemaker. He's now at Tim Adams. Actually, yeah, so he was at Quiltala or Annie's Lane before that. We used to spend a bit of time up at that winery and a bit of time up at Tim Adams. But, everyone else sort of was doing their own things up there. But
what about mates at school? Did you have some mates at school who came from wine families? Yeah,
I mean, the Pikes and the Barrys, they've got kids sort of similar age to myself, so I always grew up with them and
I had Tom on a previous episode.
Yeah. I think he's just had his first child.
Fantastic. That's possibly why he wasn't here for the trade day with Sam, who is over here. And honestly, I couldn't tell them apart. They look so similar to me.
Yeah.
Not having met either of them in person. And obviously, Clare Valley, very well known for Riesling. What decisions did your dad make about what varieties he wanted to work with?
Well, I think it was probably pretty market driven and what can sell at what price.
Yeah.
Clare, I think Clare's very classical and doesn't tend to skew too far left field. So obviously Riesling, Cabernet, Shiraz, your obvious choices. We're with this new label, Koerner, we're sort of trying to do a few different things. The Tempranillo Nouveau, for example, and Sangiovese, Grenache, Vermentino. I guess Vermentino is probably the more random one that he's planted, which was a bit of a risk, 2 hectares, and certainly paid off. The fruit's in quite high demand. So
from memory, I could be wrong, the Clare Valley it's pretty sort of long and narrow. It's so. Which part of the Clare are you based in? And tell me what's the climate and what the soil's like in that particular part?
Yes, I guess being a valley, the Clare Valley, it is sort of long and narrow and hills on either side. So Watervale, we're sort of central Watervale around Leasingham, which is southern Clare Valley.
A bit closer to Adelaide.
Yeah, which is quite convenient. Rich Terra Rossa soil, basically.
Yep.
Obviously, the further up the hill you get, gets a bit bonier and rockier and more limestone, and down towards the creeks and whatever, richer, darker clay. But,
so do you feel it's very like the opportunities for lots of different varieties are there?
Yeah, I think it's capable of producing a broad variety of wines. The fact that we can do Riesling so well, and then you can do Grenache and Mourvèdre and those sort of varieties shows that exactly what is the best. Not 100% sure, but we've got a bit of time to work that out. Yeah, so at the moment we're sort of just playing around with all those different types of varieties and seeing what's working. And we get the cold breeze that comes off the St. Vincent Gulf every night, which cools the grapes down and they can hold their natural acid and delays ripening a little bit, so you get good flavour concentration. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting what varieties can be produced out of Clare.
So was there ever a question of not working in the wine industry in some way for yourself?
Yeah, it was never 100%. When I finished school, I did vintage at Peter Lehman's in the Barossa and had a pretty good time. Enjoyed it. Then just went and worked for Dad for a while, but ended up trying something a little bit different. Did a bit of landscaping work and ended up working on Christmas Island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, helping landscape the detention centre they were building over there for a year, which was an interesting experience, good experience. I certainly wouldn't change it.
A little bit more isolated than the Clare Valley.
Yeah. But I guess it did make me sort of sit down and think while I was over there, I should probably get back and start uni and be a bit more serious about the wine industry.
So you ended up at Adelaide University?
Ended up at Adelaide Uni. It's how Josh and I have become mates. Just did the 4-year diploma, worked in the industry the whole time. First 2 years I sort of did a couple of days a week in the vineyards for Petaluma, Adelaide Hills, which was good.
Piccadilly?
Yeah, Piccadilly, nice and close to Adelaide, 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were,
Just up the hill from Wade campus, isn't it?
exactly. They were good to work for. Did a bit of work. My second 2 years, the Lane Vineyard up at Harndorf. So
Good restaurant.
yeah, good restaurant, very good wines, and good people.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have quite a bit to do with them. And yeah, did my fourth year uni experience there, and then stayed on for another year.
Mm-hmm.
Did a bit of travelling. Done vintage over at Hugel in Alsace.
Mm-hmm.
Then did some work at Chateau de Barou in Chablis.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a bit of time down in the south of France, and
Whereabouts?
went down to the Languedoc and just sort of cruised around to a few different places, and then we were in...
Just sort of cruised around. I love it. What was that like? Because Languedoc-Roussillon's part of France that I actually haven't been to. And, it seems quite big, and it's like, I don't even know where to start.
Oh, I quite enjoyed it. Just lots of rosé and relaxing, basically. But
Down near the beach.
yeah, we're also in Provence, so Bandol.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably one of the regions I have been lucky enough to visit around the world. It's probably a bit of a highlight for me.
Mm-hmm.
Mourvèdre, I've got a bit of a soft spot for.
But you kind of got into the winemaking side of things, as opposed to your dad, who sort of was strictly...
Well, I studied viticulture and winemaking, and I've probably spent half my time working in a winery, half my time working in a vineyard.
Okay. If you had to pick one,
I'd spend it in the vineyard, definitely.
Okay, interesting.
Working with the vines and the site and getting those things right sort of put some pretty solid stepping stones in place to make good wine.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get that right, well, in my opinion, then it's going to be pretty difficult in the winery.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy being outside in the sun and...
Be your own person type of thing.
Exactly. So
your travels and experience overseas, how do you think they might have kind of impacted on how you work back here and work on the family vineyard?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess when I did do most of my travelling was straight after we finished uni at Adelaide Uni. And Adelaide Uni, very scientific-based degree, so we were sort of taught how to make wine the Adelaide Uni way, I guess, and all respect for that. It's
the Bryce Rankin way.
It's all very important. But then to go over to France, and I mean, we were working at a biodynamic natural place in Chablis and visited a lot of that more style of wine producers, and just sort of seeing how they do things and speaking to them about it. And I think it's very important to always remember the science behind making wine, but it's not necessarily the absolute rule book, I guess. You can sort of do things slightly different, and
just sort of finding out what works for that particular place, and the kind of wine that you might think is representative of where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly, and you can sort of put your own spin on it. So for me, that was a big eye opener. From that respect, sort of, I guess, understanding that what we got taught at uni is not the only way. There is, people. Not everyone does it that way, and not everything has to be that clinical and clean and, I guess, numbered. But yeah. So I guess that's sort of coming back to Clare.
So how did Koerner, as far as a wine brand, kind of begin? Were you quite involved with the establishment of Koerner as a wine brand?
Yeah, it's my brother and I. My brother Jono, who's a bit younger than me. He's getting a bit more into the industry now. He's working up at Killicanoon in Clare.
Sure. Is he studying, or has he studied?
He hasn't studied, but he's just doing a bit of training and that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But he's travelled quite a bit. He's just actually got back from France, a bit of time in Burgundy and Northern Rhone, and he did vintage in Corsica a couple of years ago. So
Corsica. Interesting.
Did a lot of work with Vermentino and Sangiovese, or Narouge as they call it, and those sort of things, which is, you can sort of see that trend in our wines.
So did you kind of, the two of you, sit down and then talk to your dad and say, like, Dad, we want to sort of start our own wine branding? Do you take parts of the vineyard to make the wines?
We don't really have such structured conversations. But, just sort of...
Where are you making the wines?
So I live in Adelaide and make them in the Adelaide Hills.
Yep.
So we've got to transport the fruit down. It's an hour and a half drive or so. It's not too bad. But,
no.
We just sort of took a few different varieties and played around with it and came up with some wines. I mean, we're a long way off from where we sort of want to be, but we're only in our second vintage, so I think we've sort of got the direction. But
so I've had a taste of some of these wines before we sat down, and there's some pretty interesting styles, some interesting blends as well, some interesting varieties that I didn't even know A, existed, but B, didn't exist in Australia. So how did you actually get access to some of these varieties to be planted?
We didn't really have any say in the planting. It just sort of came about. The rosé, for example, is a blend of Sangiovese, Chacarello, which comes back to that Corsican connection. Personally, I'd never even heard of it. It was my brother that sort of pointed out, and somehow the neighbour had some. I have absolutely no idea where the cuttings came from or anything, but so we just did a bit of a Sangiovese, Chacarello, Vermentino blend for our rosé. Playing around with some skin contact on Vermentino and barrel ferment. Do the Riesling, a bit of barrel ferment on that as well. Mm-hmm. I guess just trying to really show what Clare can do and be a little bit different to what other people are doing. I mean, there's so many producers in Clare that are just producing typical Clare wines, which there's nothing wrong with, and there's always a place for that. But, I guess we're young and we've got our whole career ahead of us, so why not try and see what else we can do and push the boundaries a bit, I guess.
Well, that's pretty exciting to sort of, to see at the almost the beginning of this journey, and to sort of see how I'm interested to follow how the wines evolve in the future, and how you're going to play around with different varieties and winemaking techniques.
It's important to remember it is the start, and we've got a long way to go, and it's a work in progress. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what we're trying to achieve, you can sort of see it in the wines now, but hopefully a few more vintages under the belt, they'll just get better and better.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making some time to show me some of the wines and to chat here on the podcast. Are there ways that people can to sort of track you down and find some wines and follow what you're doing as far as like social media, websites, that kind of thing?
Facebook and Twitter's just Koerner Wine. I've got my own Instagram, which is Damon @Koerner Wine.
Damon _
sorry.
Damon _ So @Damon _ Koerner
Wine. Yeah.
Wine.
Just email or we're very small quantities at the moment, so I just sort of, hence why I'm in Melbourne at the moment, selling a bit of wine around town. And Tim Stock and Greg Richardson, Vinous Solutions up in Sydney, have started selling it.
Okay.
So that's working quite well for us. And
maybe you have some new customers here in Melbourne. But
hopefully.
Look, I'm keen to try more in the future. But thanks again for joining me.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
And thank you very much for listening to this special 2-part episode of the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino. And if you've listened to this episode, please make sure to go and listen to the other part, because they're kind of a companion episode, because I've got sort of 2 similar stories but in different regions. Of course, you can follow me on social media on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Intrepid Wino, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. If you go to facebook.com/Intrepid Wino, you'll find my Facebook page. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Intrepid Wino. And that's where I do my Let's Taste videos, where I open up a bottle of wine and just show my immediate impressions of the wine. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can do so on iTunes or Player FM. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, because that way you're going to get the newest episode of the podcast as soon as it becomes available. If you do subscribe to the podcast, please do give me a rating and a review. Give me some feedback. Tell me which episode you might have enjoyed most, or maybe who you want to hear from on the podcast. Of course, you can find all the information at intrepidwino.com, which is where you'll find all the episodes, Let's Taste videos. You'll also find lots of different writings that I've done in the past, and you can find out how to get in contact with me to share some feedback. I've got some really exciting guests coming up on the podcast. I can't wait to chat with them. But until next time, bye.